Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our final coffee chat, NCHL coffee chat series for the year. I can't believe how fast the year has gone. We started this coffee chat series back in January as a way to celebrate NCHL's 20th anniversary. So I think it's very fitting that our final session today is going to focus on the future of healthcare and sort of a look forward to the next 20 years. And so we have an amazing couple of experts in the area who are going to talk about the future of healthcare leadership. And I want to just thank them for being here and giving of their time and participating in this discussion. And I want to thank all of you who have joined us over the past several months in these coffee chat sessions. And we do plan on offering them again in 2022. So stay on the lookout for that, and we'll be announcing those soon. But thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Melanie, who will do our fabulous job of moderating today's session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I'm going to share my screen for a second here and go through some brief slides as we're kicking off today's coffee chat 2020 Foresight, the future of healthcare leadership. And I'll introduce our panelists in just a moment here, but something that I want to do, just because it is NCHL's 20th anniversary this year, is take a look back at what our history has looked like and what we've really accomplished. And I'll promise we'll try to keep it brief just so we get to the bulk of the conversation that I know we're all anticipating today. So let's look at NCHL's 20 years of impact. We were established in 2001 to address leadership challenges in healthcare. This really came out of a national summit on healthcare leadership founded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which really identified a greater emphasis and need to develop leaders within the healthcare industry. Especially as we are kind of at the beginning of the quality movement, there was this recognition that leaders really needed to be at the forefront of this movement, and they needed some way to be developed. And so thus the National Center for Healthcare Leadership was born. From there, we've really made it our mission to continue leadership and organizational excellence in both the US and abroad. One of the first things that we're really well known for is actually defining a set of leadership competencies to distinguish outstanding performance, and particularly to advocate for competency-based learning. So today, our NCHL Health Leadership Competency Model is still widely used among hospitals and health systems throughout the US, and also graduate health management programs as well. And really our mission and work has surrounded a couple of different areas. We have research and evaluation, trying to move the needle on different evidence-based practices around leadership and organizational development. We also have membership-based programs. And the beginning of this year, we actually did a coffee chat around what our 3 premier programs we're doing. This includes our Leadership Excellence Networks, USCEP, and NCAF. And then also having engaged learning opportunities for the broader healthcare community, be it through coffee chats, town halls, different things such as that. And our Healthcare Leadership Awards. Actually, our Gail L. Warden Leadership Award is being awarded to Maureen Bizignano this year in November, and we hope you will all join us. And really what I would like to emphasize here is that underpinning all of this is industry-wide collaboration and thought leadership. The reason why we've been able to move our mission forward is because people are coming across all organizations in healthcare to come together to really advance healthcare leadership as a whole. So rather than working in different organizational silos, we're really working with those inter-organizational collaborations. So this year, one of the things that we actually did is update our mission statement in honor of our 20 years of impact. So I'll read it for us all here right now. We're dedicated to advancing healthcare leadership and organizational excellence by building diverse, inclusive, and collaborative relationships in the US and abroad. And as part of our updating of this mission this year, we also really wanted to reflect on our 20 years of impact and collaborative impact. So one of the things that I think this is the first time this is being announced today is we have an annual impact report that's actually been released. I have the bit.ly link that's at the bottom here where you can access this impact report. It really reflects on who the National Center for Healthcare Leadership has been in 2020 and 2021 and the different things we've achieved in especially tumultuous time. And that's the one thing that I would really like to emphasize today is it's really been humbling for NCHL staff to be a part of this amazing group of people who during some really difficult times came together to address different issues in healthcare, be it trying to figure out staffing shortages or figuring out international digital health strategies and pivoting during times of crisis. So it's really been an honor to be alongside you all through this journey. And I'd just like to emphasize that we couldn't do it without our hospitals and health systems, and we couldn't achieve our mission without you all. With that said, I'd like to move forward to today's discussion with Dr. Laura Burning-Nissen, who's the former dean and professor of the Portland State University School of Social Work. She is also a fellow for the Institute for the Future. And we also have Dr. Richard Davis, goes by Chip, who's the senior vice president of Henry Ford Health System and the chief executive officer of Henry Ford Health System South Market and Henry Ford Hospital. We are very excited to have you both with us today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can begin this discussion. Our goal for today's session is really just to focus on what the past 20 years of healthcare has looked like, and then what do the next 20 years of healthcare look like moving into the future. So without further ado, I'd kind of like to start off with that question of NCHL has been celebrating 20 years of leadership excellence. If we look back to 2001 when NCHL was founded, I'd like to start with you, Chip. Can you tell us a little bit of what the environment has looked like for healthcare leaders over the past 20 years and some of the challenges that they have been facing?
Sure. Thanks, Melanie. And thank you, everybody, for having me today. I'll start off by apologizing for there's some dark shadow on the left-hand side of my screen. I'm traveling and I'm in a hotel room and I have no idea why it's there. And I'm not technically good enough to figure out how to get rid of it, but hopefully you can still hear me. So I think there's been really we're grappling with some of the same issues that we were in the early 2000s. And at the same point in time, we've seen some very, very significant shifts overall in our industry. Certainly clinically, while many things that used to be done on an inpatient hospital basis have now been transferred to ambulatory environments, you're now starting to see the advent of hospital at home, the rise of home care, et cetera. So the setting for our clinical care delivery have shifted in many cases. It used to be at that point in time, if you had a hip replacement, you would be in the hospital for upwards of a week. Today, many people have a hip replacement and go home that same day with early ambulation, et cetera. And a lot of that has to do with not only the clinical care advancements that we've seen, but also as the science of recovery and other things have evolved, we've recognized that having people in less acute care settings can also minimize their risk for hospital-acquired infections, et cetera. So I think one thing that has actually come about is a shift in our across that kind of care continuum, if you will. I think there's no question about it that the advent of technology has played a huge impact. A number of us were talking just before the call, and I was reminiscing that when I first started as a healthcare executive, I used to dictate. Some of you don't even know what that is. And I would dictate into a machine, and my assistant would actually then turn that into communication that would go by snail mail. I think that consumer expectations have also shifted and changed as consumers have gotten used to outside the healthcare industry, technological advancements and certainly expectations of service. Those have now translated into healthcare. And, many of us have been working at this for a while, but I think if we're really honest with ourselves and turn the mirror inward, we would probably say that we historically, have not been the most efficient and patient and family-centered industry. So I think all those things have shifted, if you will.
Thank you. And Laura, how about yourself?
Good morning, everybody. Good to be with you. That was great, Chip. I appreciate that. I guess I would say, building on that, the biggest changes have had to do with the amount of information that is moving through what we would call health systems and health care. And that includes things like the many exponential uses of information. So how information is gathered and used and applied and studied. but also the ways in which we are challenging ourselves to name the distortions of information and how it can get distorted in that process. And when it does distort, it can have exponentially bad impacts like racism embedded in technology that we're only now starting to name. I think there's also a politics of information as well, who created it, who owns it, who defines it, et cetera. And all of this has led, building on what Chip said, to sort of an acceleration of everything. Everything's just faster. So that means then that the cognitive loads, I think, of health providers has also just been sort of exponentially increased. People are just juggling a lot. And I don't need to tell all of you that, but I just think the cognitive load, I don't think we were excited about advances moving along, but I don't know if we really prepared ourselves cognitively, practically, spiritually, for the kind of carrying of this intense load. Just one more thing I'd say about the politicization of this information. Some of that's been important and necessary and sort of righteous, but some of it's been unproductive. And like, did anyone ever believe we'd evolve to a time when we were debating basic scientific concepts? So some of that information has been straightforward and progressive and important and productive, even when there's conflict, but some of it's gone off sideways in some pretty scary ways. And I think disinformation is something I'm going to talk about later. I think it's a real issue.
No, that's a great point. As the information evolves and we have the world at our fingertips, this really does impact the cognitive load of our staff in healthcare. And then also, how do we learn and accelerate the learning of that information? So I appreciate you both commenting on the acceleration of technology and just the information that exists. What I kind of want to look at is 20 years into the future. And what I want to premise this with is, seems daunting, right? We're, as healthcare professionals, we're all in the field right now trying to tackle today's challenges of the pandemic, other crises that are going on in the world. And looking 20 years into the future may seem far off and daunting, but the reality is that many of the early careerists right now might be tomorrow's CEOs 20 years in the future. So I think it's really important to consider, what are we going to expect healthcare leaders to face in 20 years? And Laura, I want to ask you that question first and see, what are your thoughts? 20 years into the future, where will we be?
Well, I want to start by just saying, a few years ago, I'll tell a quick story. A few years ago, I was at a Foresight Futures meeting at the Institute for the Future, and there was a panel on how to build foresight and futures thinking into your organizational capacity. And one of the speakers, I think, was from a hospital, children's hospital. He said that as a hospital futurist, his most important job, and keep in mind, this is 3 or 4 years ago, was to prepare leaders for profound, unprecedented, disruptive change. Now, that was 3 or 4 years ago. I got to look that guy up because he was really right about that. That was a big mic drop moment. A futurist that I follow and admire, Leah Zadie, says there's really only 3 issues that matter in the future: the future of artificial intelligence, the future of equity in every sense of the word, and climate change. I would add disinformation, democracy, and the future of surveillance. Like, the future of those things, I think, are going to be huge in terms of shaping our world. The future of health and healthcare is bigger than health and healthcare, is, I guess, my point. I think it's really important to focus on the sector and go deep in the sector, but I also think it's really important to keep an eye on what's happening around the sector, the drivers of the sector. I also think in 20 years, we will have had to wrestle with a very real period of recovery that's going to have to, and reconceptualization that's going to have to happen after COVID. And potentially before the next pandemic. There are very real political dynamics, both nationally and globally, about what health and health access should be. Too often I have heard the term buying health. That's a real term that gets used behind the scenes. How much health can you afford to buy? That is a frame that I hope is disrupted within the next 20 years, and that we can see other sort of frameworks for the future of health and our health systems. the future of the social safety net is really important to me too, as a social worker. So I would just say the future of healthcare is just bigger than healthcare.
Excellent, thank you. And those are some really grand challenges. And we will eventually in this conversation address how we prepare leaders for that future. But Chip, I'd love to hear your take on what the next 20 years are going to look like.
Yeah, so I think that Laura hit some key points here, including the need to embrace what one of my mentors, Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School, used to call disruptive innovation, where when you know, Clay was great at looking outside of healthcare at different industries and looking at those that underwent strife. And what you saw as organizations that thrived in those industries, like the steel mills, et cetera, were ones that truly embraced innovation and disruptive innovation. And I think that one of the things that as future healthcare leaders and current healthcare leaders need to do is be able to educate our workforce and align them around changing care delivery models. So, you know, we talked about things. I think in the next few years, you're going to see more and more care shifting outside of certainly acute care hospitals and ambulatory settings, but to the hospital at home. I think you're going to see a huge uptake in telehealth. You know, many of us were advocating for this pre-pandemic, and we had this slow kind of movement toward both patients and providers really embracing that. I think at most of our organizations, we probably gained 10 to 15 years on that curve in terms of people embracing telehealth. And while it's not, you know, for everything, I think that it's absolutely demonstrated its efficacy in terms of that. I think we're going to have to deal with a smaller workforce. Many of us right now, and particularly in nursing, surge techs, and other critical care delivery positions are just very, very challenged. We have people who are retiring early. We have nurses who are being travelers. I can tell you I have a 35% vacancy rate right now in a couple of my hospitals in nursing, forcing us to close beds, et cetera. And I think that we are also going to have to grapple with continued cost pressures. You know, healthcare today is a $3.5 trillion industry in the US, 22% of the GDP. Depending on what healthcare economist you want to believe, in 20 years, people believe that it's going to be somewhere between 40 and 50% of the GDP. That is just not acceptable. I mean, there's no way that a country can actually afford to spend that much money out of pocket on healthcare. So I think that we are going to have to embrace not only different care delivery models, but also ways to reduce cost. And I think one of the ways to do that is to learn and to actually apply progressive performance improvement tools, whether those are lean, whether those are human-centered design, those things that came out of manufacturing industry that we know can be applied to processes of healthcare that can enhance both the outcomes as well as decrease the cost.
Excellent, thank you. And as I mentioned, we're talking about some pretty grand challenges here that are going on within the next 20 years. And so I think the ultimate question becomes, and what NCHL is really founded upon, is how do we develop leaders to be prepared for these types of challenges? So I have kind of a two-part question here. My first one is, how do we prepare leaders? And then I'll ask my second one after, related to what are we not doing that we could be doing? So Chip, I'll start with you. How can we prepare current leaders for some of these grand challenges that they might face?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think that we in leadership need to make sure we understand what's going on the front lines of care and those that support it. And that really means getting out of our nice cloistered offices and out talking to people about what are their challenges, what are they dealing with. And certainly right now, more than any other time, at least in my career, you know, you really have people struggling with now going on 18, 20 months of being in the pandemic. And, you know, they're just emotionally spent. So I think that one of the things we're going to do is have to replenish our organization's emotional bank accounts, if you will. And we need to understand what our workforce is going through in order to help them move forward. I think the other thing that I would urge our colleagues to do is, again, I mentioned it a little earlier, we are going to need tools as leaders to deal with many of these issues. And I do believe that progressive performance improvement tools will make a world of difference. And, you know, early on, I had the opportunity early in my career to get exposed to many of these things. At the time, they were not embraced by our colleagues. I think that people have seen that we need a new lens, and just continuing with the way that we've always provided the care is not going to be something that we can continue with. So I think that those are things that are going to be critical for us and for all of you in terms of preparation to be the next generation leaders.
Thank you. Laura, what are your thoughts?
Well, that was great. I'm just thinking about, I want to say, I think learning to engage in the building of political will with the communities around healthcare, the place-based dynamic. I think there's going to be more and more social movement building around health equity and access to health in very place-based ways. And I think that health leaders of the future would be wise to partner and ally and listen and learn from communities as well. So I think that's going to be really important. As a foresighter, I would say learning to focus through complexity is one of the #1 skills of the future. Cultivating the ability of the workforces to balance urgency with a longer term vision, so that you build a kind of collective foresight skill and capacity within organizations and within the sector. That involves a kind of continuous learning, and to Chip's point, that kind of social invention and experimenting of new ways to do things that help people think through, wow, if we keep doing this thing we're doing, here's where that will go. And since we want to be over here, how do we need to change the thing we're doing now? This means going way beyond just trend spotting and trend analyzing. It's really about starting to think about what's around the corner from the trend, and how do we help people look and listen and build a collective capacity to help partner with communities to shape the future, not just react to it.
I love that. Thank you. And as we're kind of looking at the trends, but what's around the trend, I think a good question to ask is, what is something that we could be doing right now that we're not? And so, Laura, I'll bounce it right back to you. Is there anything that leaders could be doing right now to prepare us for the trends around that curve that we're talking about here? How do we optimize the future?
You know, I just keep coming back to think globally, but act locally. I do think some health systems are really good about this and some are really bad. But I think really attending to the places where the healthcare is being provided, becoming embedded and partners with the community, not just a provider, not just a corporation that's in the community, but really a member of the community, listening, learning from, shaping, acting locally, thinking globally. To me, that's something that could really be better, I think, in the healthcare sector.
I love that. Thank you. You know, in our health leadership competency model we mentioned earlier, community collaboration is one of those key competencies, and this concept of boundary spanning, like having leaders reach outside of the organization to collaborate. And so I really love that concept of working locally. Chip, how about yourself? What are we not doing now that we could be doing?
Well, I'd like to pick up with what Laura talked about learning through our communities. I think that's critically important. I also think as healthcare leaders, that requires us to turn the mirror inward. And really drop the veil that we know everything that we're supposed to do, and we know it all. I think that's a fallacy. I am frequently reminded of, when you talk to patients and families, the things that we think they want are not always what they actually want or need. And again, as we work more broadly with our communities around value-based care, et cetera, I think that we really need to understand that. And I think that requires us in leadership to have a little bit of a different mindset. And I like to think of having the mindset of a beginner's mind. You know, if frequently, if you're ever involved in root cause analysis, that when sentinel events happen in your hospital, and you walk back, I remember one that started in the laundry. And I went down to the laundry and thinking that I knew what was going on. And after a good hour, I realized that the folks working in the laundry for the last 35 years knew exactly what the problems were, right? We had just never bothered to ask them and engage them in the change. So I think that I would ask us all to rethink our approach to leadership and to focus that on not only on our communities and our patients and our families, but also on the care delivery model itself. I am someone who believes we have an unsustainable care delivery model in this country, and we have all of the tools to create the new one. So what is the 21st century care delivery model? And I think it's a combination of many of the things that we talked about today, but it will have to be driven by all of you out there in order to achieve that, and not just continue what we've had really, which is a 100-year-old care delivery model, which served us well in the 20th century. But with the advent of all the things we've discussed in the 21st century, I would argue at least that it's time to really come up with a new care delivery model.
Excellent, thank you. At this time, we have about 3 minutes left. So I'd like to invite anyone who has any questions to go ahead and put them in the Q&A box or the chat. I'll take a look to see if we have any questions. This has been really a thought-provoking conversation, and I want to thank you both for partaking. I guess before any questions open up, I kind of like ending some of these discussions with, you have the floor. Any final thoughts that you'd like to communicate or share with everyone? So Laura, I'll turn it back to you real quick to see if you have anything that you would like to share about the future of healthcare.
As leaders, I think one of the most important things that folks can be doing is preparing themselves to think about the future of power itself. And many have been saying this for a long time, that we're moving from hierarchies to really more distributed types of power, more lateral power. And there's some really great writing about this. I have some things shared on my blog, which is socialworkfutures.com. You can feel free to visit there. But I just think really considering that the future of power is lateral and network-based distributed power. What can be distributed will be distributed. COVID has really jump-started that. Thinking about what that means for your own leadership journey is really important. And then most leaders got trained in a hierarchical model, but the future is distributed.
I love that. That's also the way the leadership research is going as well, is that this concept of collective leadership. We do have a couple of questions here, but Chip, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think it's been captured. Again, I think that we've learned that healthcare is now a team sport. It's not a hierarchical sport. And we need to embrace that.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see, we have a question. The one that came through first, we'll go with it. I think this is interesting. If another pandemic occurred in the future, what could we do different and more effectively? Chip, would you like to comment on that?
Sure. So I think a number of us have already started to work on this. I think there's no question that the pandemic showed us where we have real challenges within our delivery system, both in our physical plants as well as across the continuum of care. I think it also has highlighted significant opportunities for us along the way to enhance. So in our particular case, we're looking at designing new hospitals. We're looking at things that we need to put in those hospitals, many of which we learned during the pandemic. So again, I think there's many opportunities for us moving forward. And I think that many of us believe there will be another pandemic. So, previously we probably did not have a strategy, local strategy to address those. We learned that on the fly this time. I think in the future, you need to have those on your shelf and be ready to pull them down.
Excellent, thank you. Laura, did you want to add anything to that?
I just think building better health infrastructure beyond the health system, so that community, so health promotion, health communication, trust, those things really are restored and strengthened before we get into health disasters. And by the way, I was just looking, this is the book I really highly recommend about the future of power. It's called New Power by Hymans and Timms. Really a great read. Everyone should get it. I don't get any kickback. I just love it.
No, I love it. We love a good resource to share with our community. I do want to thank you both for your time today because we're at the top of the hour, but something I'd actually like to leave the audience with, because it's a fabulous question to reflect upon from our audience, is a recent economist said, when a patient is referred to as a consumer and a physician as a provider, an angel dies. How do we retain humanity in our care interactions? And I think that's a really powerful question to be asking. And although I don't have time for us to be asking that today, I do think that the future of healthcare leadership is going to entail us to put more humanity in patients and the people, right? The people that work for our health systems, who quite frankly aren't well right now, and we need to improve the well-being of all. So thank you both so much for your time today. It's really been a pleasure to discuss the future of healthcare leadership with you both. The only other thing that I'll quickly mention is that NCHL's Organizational and Leadership Excellence Conference is upcoming in November. You can go to nchlevents.com to register today, and that's in addition to our Gail L. Warden Leadership Excellence Award Dinner, which is in conjunction with that event. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Chip. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you all next year for the coffee chats.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.